Yes, good morning, good morning, good morning. My Arts and Humanities class. As you see today, I'm back at Ryle High School, broadcasting. And yes, I got a change in the shirt here. Notice my nice Alabama shirt. And the school is fairly deserted. There's a few people, skeleton crew of office staff, skeleton crew of the administration, and very few teachers here. But yes, it is time for arts and humanities. I have to admit, this morning I've been very busy, and to be real honest, I got here about 6:45, and I've been doing things ever since then. Forgive me for not having sent out an email that I normally do. I'll try and get around to that later on, perhaps this evening, because it seems my email list from home is much better than is more efficient than the one here. Um, as far as what's coming down the pipe, we are getting towards the end of this unit. And to test this unit, I'm going to put a extra long quiz on Canvas, and you can take it on Canvas and then submit it, and then I will take the grades off that. I think that's the best way to go. I have to admit that Canvas is something I never thought I would use. However, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures. Me, frankly, I much prefer standing in front of a classroom and seeing students, even those who have trouble with the clock, shall we say. But no, I do. I want to see my students. I want to see you guys. But right now, that's not going to happen. And so going forward, yes, and I will announce it via email. I will announce it via Canvas that we are having a quiz, and the other types of assignments that will come through Canvas. I'm going to learn those too, and we're going to get through this course. And so, yes. By the way, feel free, and I really, really want you to make comments. Your making comments helps me know that you're tuning in. Therefore, I don't have to harass the principals so they start calling you or I start calling you. Heaven forbid that. And so, yeah. And so today, we're going to have a short lecture, continuing our discussion that we talked about yesterday of the wild goings on in, yes, good morning, Max Coates, who is not in this class. Yes, but thank you for chiming in. It is good to see you as well. But the wild goings on in the English royal family, as if that has never stopped. But it was particularly wild and woolly. I mean, the royal family was not nearly so genteel as they are today. Henry VIII, yeah, he's quite a character. He knew what he wanted, and right or wrong or people's feelings had little to do with it. Yes, good morning, Ms. Ninghouse. Good to see you on board. So Henry VIII, like we talked about yesterday, had executed his wife, Anne Boleyn. You saw that hopefully on the video. And I miss having you guys in class. And one of the things I miss having about you in class, we could all watch that together, and I could have pointed out, certain things. For example, that video, that movie, The Other Boleyn Girl, is actually shot at the Tower of London. And I've been to the Tower of London, and that's it sits right on the Thames River, and that entrance to the Tower of London for prisoners was via the river. They had a river opening where you actually rode into the Tower of London through a great gated fence. And the Tower of London for prisoners was normally a one-way trip. Most people who went in did not come out. For example, Sir Thomas More, and the unfortunate Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth, on the other hand, she will have better luck. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. So, yeah, Henry VIII told um, his one of his female companions, Mary Boleyn, that he didn't want to see her anymore, and that she better not show her face there again. And she didn't. Although Mary Boleyn does take the child, little redheaded Elizabeth, and raises the child, who will become a future monarch of England, but not quite yet. Anyway, so like I said, Henry VIII had 6 wives. We are on Roman numeral 3, part J. Henry VIII, once again, he declared his new church, making almost no religious, no dogmatic, no teaching changes. He seized a lot of church property. Yeah, seized a lot of church property, destroyed a lot of monasteries, had a lot of monks put to death. Yeah, he was, he knew what he wanted. And he had a total of 6 wives, and probably countless women he had friendships with, shall we say. Because, think about it. If you're a woman in the court of Henry VIII, you hang around, which you want to do, because, that would be your way to finding a husband who was connected. And if Henry VIII approaches you for the purposes of being friends, shall we say, and you turn down Henry VIII's friendship, he's King of England. It is not past him to have people declared a witch, for example. You remember from watching the film, Anne Boleyn was worried that Henry VIII would call her a witch, and as a witch, she'd be burned at the stake. Anyway, so Catherine of Aragon, who never provided Henry with a son, but did give birth to a daughter whose name was Mary the First, and we'll get back to her later. Actually, she's Mary the Only, because there is no second Queen Mary. Oh, there's William and Mary. Yeah, that's true. There was another Mary. There's William and Mary, who will come later in England, but I don't think there was another Mary in England. So, Catherine, once again, of Aragon, after Henry divorced her, like I said yesterday, it wasn't like she went on Match.com. She didn't start hanging around in bars and looking for the next husband. She spent the rest of her life in a convent, along with little Mary. And once again, you could pick about 100 places easily in the world that would be more cheery for a child to grow up in than a convent. Yeah. Anyway, Mary, of course, was very upset with the way that her mother was treated, and Mary grew up very staunch Catholic. She was very upset with the way her mother was treated, and when she became queen, she enacted, revenge on the practitioners of her estranged father's new faith. Say, what does that mean? It means that, and we'll talk about this later on, when Mary comes to adulthood, it turns out Mary is next in line to the throne. And after Henry VIII, Mary becomes the Queen of England. Actually, there was a small interlude of 8 days where 2 teenagers, Lady Jane Grey and her boyfriend, were put up as monarchs of England, but they were deposed and beheaded. It was a dangerous thing to wear the crown in the 16th century in England. But anyway, so we'll talk about her later. Mary becomes Queen of England, and she earns the nickname Bloody Mary, because when Mary becomes Queen of England, she makes it her personal duty to undo everything her father did. And so, get your head around this. Um, if you are living when Henry VIII was king, and you decide that you don't want to join this new church, this new Anglican church, you want to be a staunch and loyal Catholic, there's a good chance you could find yourself being guest of honor at a barbecue for heresy. Then comes Mary. And Mary is going to try and undo all that. So now, if you had joined the Church of England, if you were an Anglican, if you were outspoken, if you were a leader in the Anglican Church, there was a good chance you would be burned at the stake. I actually have an interesting video on that to show you at a later date. So let's get back to Henry and his numerous wives. So while he was married to Catherine, Henry struck up an affair with the lovely court lady by the name of Anne Boleyn, who, once again, Anne was the younger sister of Mary, who Henry had had a previous affair with. I mean, this guy Henry. Pardon me. Yes, and Anne Boleyn, not a lot of historians notice it, but Anne Boleyn was, I don't guess you'd call it gifted, but she actually had 6 fingers on each hand. Yeah. Made it extra interesting buying gloves for Christmas. So yes, and she also, of course, at this time was carrying around the king's child, literally, and that's when Henry VIII said, "We got to get something going here. We got I've got a child coming. I just know he's going to be a son," and so he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. And he wanted to create this new church, and so that's what he did. So she became the second wife, and that child, though, was Elizabeth, and he was disappointed, not the offspring the king wanted. So to get rid of her, he accused Anne Boleyn. If you saw the film yesterday, he accused of Anne Boleyn of adultery, and adultery on the king is being a traitor. And the death for being a traitor is having your head cut off. And so both Anne Boleyn and her brother George Boleyn were both beheaded for treason. So it's interesting to note, though, while all this is going on, Henry is dating a third wife. Her name, Jane Seymour, quite lovely woman. And as soon as Anne Boleyn's executed, he marries Jane Seymour, and Jane Seymour actually does bear Henry VIII a son, Edward IV. And both Anne Boleyn dies in childbirth, and Edward is never healthy for his entire life and will die at a young age. So his next marriage then was to a woman he had never met. She was German. Her name was Anne of Cleves. And once again, this is another one of those marriages that was made entirely for political purposes only. So Anne of Cleves shows up to the palace, and Henry VIII is at the palace, and they look at each other and go, and they both decide that they don't want to be married to each other. And so this marriage ends in a rather quick divorce. And then Henry married the very attractive and very young, she was a teenager. And by this time, Henry is in his 40s. Her name was Catherine Howard. And Catherine Howard was really not too smart, because she actually does commit adultery on the king. And that is definitely a head chopping coming up. Not only her, but her boy toy as well were executed, because they really thought that they could keep this affair secret in the palace. The palace was nothing but a rumor mill. Everybody was always watching everybody else and whispering, hoping to get a leg up with favor with the king. And sure, somebody told on him. And so then his last wife was Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr simply outlived the guy, but never gave him a son. And so Henry VIII had 3 legal offspring. There was Mary I, there was Elizabeth, and then there was young Edward. Now, of the three, Edward will actually be king for a very short time until he dies. He'll have a regent who is an Anglican, a leader of the Anglican Church. But yeah, Edward the Fourth will rule. I mean, he's a child, you know. He rules England for a very short while, and then comes our friend Mary the First, Bloody Mary, and we'll get back to her later on. Okay, now if you're looking at your study guide, this begins to get difficult here. And we look at page 226 in your book. I cannot believe how low tech we're going to go here. But page 226, these are great books. Page 226 in your book, and please, all my colleagues are laughing at me now. I mean, I would have sent this picture out early this morning, but I really was tied up like you would not believe, where we talk about the rise of Northern Europe. And we begin to see, yeah, look at that. Yes, right there. Screenshot that, baby. Is that a famous piece of art that we necessarily have to remember? No, but that piece of art shows us a couple of things about the new nature of the Northern Renaissance. Yeah. The last chapter, back in the good old days when we had class, was concerning the Italian Renaissance, called the High Renaissance. Well, this is the Northern Renaissance. The Northern Renaissance is going to be different in terms of art. Number one, frescoes become a thing of the past. You don't see frescoes in the North for the very simple reason that, you know, once again, a fresco is an oil painting onto wet plaster. And part of the process is that the plaster dries. Well, the problem in Northern Europe is the difference in climate. Northern Europe has what you call a maritime climate. You say, well, what does that mean? A maritime climate is the kind of climate you find if you've ever been from San Francisco, California, and I haven't either, but into the Northwest. It rains a lot, you know, and it rains a lot in the summertime. And so there's always a lot of moisture in the air, a lot of dampness. And so painting, I hate this. Painting, it never happens at my house, does it? All right, stupid. Ah! Clapping doesn't work anymore for some reason. So painting oil on wet plaster just doesn't work anymore. And so what you begin to see in the Northern Renaissance is the advent of, well, they continue to do oil paintings on wood panel, but a new type of painting is oil on, and this will be on your test, oil on canvas. Yeah, canvas. What is canvas, you say? Well, canvas, before it became this marvelous technical tool that we have now, canvas is cloth, a certain kind of cloth. Actually, the first pieces of canvas that were used for painting was the same material they used for ship sails, a very thick, absorbent cloth. And the cool thing about canvas for painters was that, whereas with a wood panel, and you have a couple of wood panels in the back of the room, you've seen them, those giant paintings, they're made of wood. But if you want to transport those paintings from point A to point B, you have to take them down, and, you know, they're big and bulky. And well, with canvas paintings, you don't necessarily have to do that. With canvas painting, since it's made of cloth, you can simply remove the frame and then roll it up and slide it into a tube, and therefore the painting is now more compact and also more easily transportable. But yeah, and so the painting mediums of the Northern Renaissance become wood paint, oil paint on wood panel. There'll still be a lot of those, particularly in altar pieces, things of that nature. And I will be sending you some pictures of altarpieces. And also, in fact, that's what I'm going to do as soon as I finish this. I'll send you pictures of altarpieces. And also canvas, this new medium of painting oil paintings on cloth or canvas. Okay. Now, the other thing about the Northern Renaissance was that Northern art, the Renaissance movement in the North, became more and more humanist. It began to drift away from, if you remember, much of the art of the High Renaissance, much of the stuff we looked at, much of the works of Michelangelo, Leonardo, much of their works were very centered around Christianity, around the Bible, around the church. Well, the Northern Renaissance, the subject matter begins to become more and more humanist. It becomes more and more secular. In fact, you begin to see painters painting, particularly people who could afford to pay them. And they put them in their paintings. And I'll be sending you some examples of some of the best ones as we move on. Northern and Western Europe became consumed not only in the affairs of the Protestant Reformation, but also the new discoveries of Christopher Columbus and the New World and the massive profits that came across the Atlantic. Spain at the time was ruled by a family called the Habsburgs. You guys who have taken your social studies classes, your world civ classes, hopefully remember the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs ruled not only Spain at one time, but they also ruled Austria. In fact, the Austrian Habsburgs will rule until the end of World War I. So, England at the time was ruled by the Tudors. Yes, Henry VIII was a Tudor. Henry VII was a Tudor. Henry VIII was a Tudor. Mary I was a Tudor, and so was young Elizabeth. So with Northern Europe discovering new routes to put hands on the coveted spice, as well as the other profit-making goodies from overseas, the cities of Venice and Genoa, the primary cities of the Renaissance, Venice and Genoa, the big money-making cities, they actually began to lose money and lose status, while Spain, England, and the Netherlands began to cash in. And with money comes art, and we all know that. Spain now, for example, after Columbus, within 100 years of Columbus, Spain was hauling so much silver, gold too, precious stones too, but primarily silver, literally tons of silver, if you can wrap your head around that, that they needed extra room on their ships to pack in that silver. And so what they did is that they would, you see, ships back then, and you'll like this, Mr. Pugh, because I'm talking Navy here, but ships back then, sat very tall. They had very tall sails. And, me and you, Mr. Pugh, when we were children, we made little sail ships and put the sail on top of them, and then we blew them, and the thing falls over. And so how do you prevent that from happening? Answer, ballast. What they would do with these tall ships, and I'm talking about the ones who brought, for example, the Mayflower over, for example, the Spanish galleons. What they would do to keep the ship sitting upright in water was that they would load stones, tons of stones, in the bottom of the ship so that that weight would keep the ship from tipping over. And so, point being, two things came to this. Number one, the point being was that those stones, the Spanish and others began to say, why don't we just take those stones out? And instead of having stones, which don't pay us anything, having stones in the bottom of the ship, let's just put silver there as the ballast, as the counterweight. And so the Spanish literally began shipping silver by the boatload, by the ton, across the Atlantic Ocean. And this also, this idea of using that weight to bring products The colonists began to do that too. For example, I know that some of you guys have been to, for example, Savannah, Georgia, for example, Old Town, Boston, for example, Georgetown in around DC. Any of the seaboard, the old seaboard cities, perhaps you visited there, and in the Old Town, you'll see all the streets are what you call cobblestones. And you say, well, why do they have cobblestone streets? Well, that came from the idea. What happened was they took all these stones out of the ships and they just dumped them. And, this happened so many times that some of the smarter people in these towns, because, streets made of dirt just are not very good. And so they took these stones and laid them in the street and poured a covering of concrete on top of them. And suddenly you have basically a hardened paved street that won't turn into a quagmire every time it rains. And that's how cobblestone streets came about. But anyway, oh yes, have a couple more questions. Yes, midwives and wet nurse. A midwife and a wet nurse. You see, back in the good old days, before they had OBGYNs, doctors who help women birth children, they had midwives. And that was a woman who had witnessed, helped with, aided children. And so what they would do is this woman would aid in the birth of children. Now, the other common factor, and we talked about this in the last chapter about the Renaissance, was a wet nurse. Michelangelo and many other people during this time were wet nursed. That means that they would hire a woman, normally a poor woman, who at the time was nursing a child of her own, and they would give her their child for a certain number of years to basically nourish until that child could come back home. Michelangelo, like he said, he spent several years in the home of his wet nurse while he grew up. And so, yeah. Okay. It is interesting to note that with all this extra wealth, the Northern European courts produced very little original art and actually had to import artists from the ranks of the Italian and the German masters. King Francis I actually imported Leonardo da Vinci and gave him shelter literally until his death. Although when it says gave him shelter, da Vinci left Italy because he'd been accused of having improper relations with some of his younger art students. And he slipped out of Italy because of that and spent the rest of his days in the court of King Francis I of France, where he died. Henry VIII utilized Hans Holbein the Elder, and I will send a painting of Hans Holbein the Elder. This is where this art is going to become tough, is that we can't reference these books. But yes, Hans Holbein the Elder, and I mean, these are artists of the Northern Renaissance. You don't see, they're not, as even if we were coming back to class, we would not have a test on Hans Holbein the Younger and Hans Holbein the Elder did this work of art, and Jean Vermeer did that work of art, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. Okay. I think that we will stop here with Roman numeral 6, cut off at 30 minutes. And I will be sending you an email later on today with several pictures in it so you can get some sense of the Northern Renaissance. But yes, I hope you all have a good day. Please stay well. And for goodness sakes, don't be gathering in groups. And for goodness sakes, wash your hands. Our next test will be on Canvas. Say again. Our next test will be on Canvas. So you need to keep watching your emails, keep watching your YouTube videos, because, yeah, there will be a test, and these tests will have time limits. So, yeah, have a good day. Thank you all very much.